I'll try and keep this story as short as I can, but so much of what makes it creepy is in the details and atmosphere surrounding my experience. My mom and I decided to visit Nevada City, California on a whim. It's an old-timey Victorian-era mining and logging town built in 1856. Look at pictures of Google if you really want to see a creepy town. It looks haunted without even having to try. After eating lunch, we decided to stroll around the massive Pioneer Historical Cemetery on the outskirts of town. It wasn't quite dusk, but the trees are really tall in this area, so daylight is hard to gauge, and it usually feels later than it is. This cemetery was sprawling. I mean, most pioneer cemeteries are because of the high mortality rate of the time. Lots of child graves. As we progress through the cemetery, it starts like a proper cemetery with large ornate tombs, mausoleums, marble obelisks, family plots, etc. But what's wild about this cemetery is that it stretches on almost forever into the woods. Spooky, but this isn't a paranormal story. As we followed the cemetery deeper and deeper into the woods, it became hard to tell what's a grave or not, and it's getting more wild and overgrown. It eventually devolved into just wilderness, with the occasional sign of homeless camps like abandoned tents, bags of trash, etc. Luckily, the trees were opening up and more daylight was coming through, and we ended up in an open area with a large solitary juniper tree, tall brush, and a few random graves. I sort of tripped over something and it turned out to be a purse. Like a large designer purse, and it looked super old, like it had been there for a while. Looking up from the purse about 10 yards ahead, I saw what looked like a pile of women's clothing, but then I noticed to my horror a tangled mass of hair, and I froze. You ever know something without actually knowing something? I knew that this was a dead woman's body down to my core. I put a hand out and stopped my mom, who was trailing behind me. "Hey, get your phone and call the police. That's a dead body over there." And she immediately started dialing 911, because like me, she just knew. Then it gets bananas. As my mom and I are discussing the situation, we have our attention turned away from the corpse. We looked back at the body, and I kid you not, she was sitting up with her back turned toward us. She was wearing a bright red trench coat, and she had super grimy blonde hair that was more standing up than lying on her shoulders. It's like the grime in her hair allowed it to defy gravity. Slowly, she turned her head over her shoulder like something out of a horror movie and spotted us. She literally jumped to her feet lightning fast and turned to face us. Her front was a mess of torn clothing, and she was barely covered. In the weirdest gait I've ever seen, she rapidly advanced on us, in a jerking or lurching fashion. Her hands were desperately trying to keep her covered. My first thought was that she had been assaulted. She kept trying to speak, but it was like she couldn't form words, only make short high-pitched squeaks. As she closed in on me, she stopped and pointed down in excitement at the purse I had tripped over. I asked if it was hers, and when I did, her expression changed into a horrible smile. It still haunts me. And suddenly, she was slowly starting to undress herself, and we had to shout at her to stop. By this point, we had the cops on the way. We said we had found somebody in serious distress, but be that as it may, we both knew that this was not a safe situation for us, and we quickly backed away, turned, and cooked it out of there. When we followed up with the police out of concern and morbid curiosity, they said whoever we found must have fled because they didn't find her. I really hope she's okay and gets the help she needs, though. This encounter happened decades ago, before the time of cell phones and internet. It's a cautionary tale, and I'm glad I now have the opportunity to share with total strangers. Years ago, on a beautiful early September afternoon, my brother and a couple of his friends and me, and a couple of mine went to a local county fair. While there, we met a group of 4 guys in merged groups. We were having so much fun, popping back to the cars occasionally to drink a beer and smoke, that we decided to keep the party going after we left the fair. Everybody followed me to my apartment, where we called another friend whose family owned a local single-story motel. She hooked us up with a room at the end, far away from other guests, and we were off to the races. It was a fun night, lots of laughing, conversation, and drinking. I really enjoyed chatting with one of the new guys. Nothing flirty or romantic, just similar interests, but there was another one who I didn't like. He was very competitive with the other guys, bragging himself up and consistently making fun of them. He didn't add anything interesting to conversations, wasn't very bright, and had a locker room style humor that I've never enjoyed. No big deal, not everybody clicks. I probably didn't say more than a couple of words to him that night. The party eventually ended and everybody went their separate ways. A couple of weeks later, I'm home alone on a Saturday night when I hear the doorbell ring. I open up and it was the annoying guy. He told me that he's cruising town with a friend and asked if I'd like to join them. I was honestly pretty bored, so I agreed to go, and we headed downstairs. The car was the type with 2 bucket seats in the front, a dip between them with an emergency brake in it, and a bench seat in the back. When the annoying guy told me to slide over in the front to sit between him and the driver, I laughed and said, "That wouldn't be comfortable at all," and climbed into the back. We start rolling, and I noticed that the driver wasn't one of the other 3 guys we met at the fair. I felt a bit disappointed but sucked it up. After all, the annoying guy's other friends were amazing and this guy might be too. I threw out a conversation starter. Crickets from the driver and more urging from AG to crawl into the front seat. I tried another topic. Same response, and now I'm picking up tense vibes from the driver. I don't know what AG had intended, but all my alarm bells were going off and I wanted out. I coolly tapped the driver on the shoulder, said I decided to go home and turn in early, and he promptly turned around and headed back to my place. In the 5 minutes I was in his car, he hadn't said one word to me, but I swear I felt him relax immediately when I ended the evening. At home, I got out of that car as fast as I could, said bye and headed up the walk. I heard the car back up and drive away with relief, but when I got to the door of my building, something made me turn around. AG was right behind me. I was pissed. "Better run if you want to catch your ride," I said. "It's too late. I'll never catch him," he said. "Well, guess you're walking home in the dark then." "Okay, but I need to use your bathroom first." Folks, I ended up saying okay for a lot of predictable reasons. I was young, didn't have much of a backbone, and had been raised like most girls to be polite. It was obvious he was creeping on me and might actually have dark intentions. I was furious with him and I still said okay. Everything turned all right, but I still hate that's what happened. Please learn from my mistakes. Screw politeness. I led us into the apartment and stayed by the door while he used the bathroom. He comes out and I'm holding the door open for him, and he plops onto the far right end of the couch. He kind of slides back, cups his hand behind his neck, puts his feet on my coffee table. Then, wearing an I win grin, he tells me he's not going anywhere. I stand there numbly for a bit, mentally flipping through my options. It's important to note here that I was never physically intimidated by AG. I'm 5'11" in my stocking feet and was 125 pounds at the time. So slim, but definitely not petite. I'd also been holding my own in roughhousing sessions with my brothers for years. AG was maybe 5'4" and kind of small. Obviously not to be trusted, but not capable of overpowering me by brute force alone. At this point, I'm standing in front of a narrow piece of wall between the door on my right and the end of the sofa on my left, both within the touching distance. The outrage and fury overtake me, and I know what I'm going to do. I surprise him by grabbing his shirt front with both hands, pulling him up and to the right, then shoving him against the narrow wall space. I place my left forearm across his chest, pin him with all my weight, while opening the door with my right hand. I hold the door with my right foot, grab his shirt front again, and push him into the hall. All this happening lightning quick. As the door was closing in his face, he said, "But I'll have to walk all the way across town," and I yelled through the door, "You should have thought of that before you got out of the damn car." Never saw him again, but a few weeks later there was a knock at my door. I answered. It was a local man with cerebral palsy, flanked by 2 of his buddies. He told me he wanted to take me for a really nice dinner and to buy me a bottle of champagne. The champagne comment was so random and specific that it kept spinning in the back of my head. I told him no, that I don't date strangers, and I thought it was bizarre that he was doing this. As they turned to go, the pieces fell into place, and I said, "Wait a minute. Were you told to come here by a short red-headed guy named AG?" He confirmed that was indeed the case. And all of these years later, I still believe AG told the guy with cerebral palsy that I was a prostitute, and a bottle of champagne was my code phrase for customers. Such a nasty little creep. In the mid to late 1970s, my parents were in a camping club with about 5 or 6 other couples and camped at various campgrounds together around the Midwest. We are from Chicago. One time we went to this campground that had a little park near a large pond with a playground not far from the water. My sister and I were playing in a sandbox. I was around 10 and she was a couple of years younger. After having already gone on the swings and seesaw earlier, suddenly out of nowhere, this boy, who was probably about 12 or 13, wearing a black t-shirt and bell-bottom jeans with patches on the knees, was standing in the sandbox a few feet from us. He had long black hair down to his shoulders and dark eyes. He didn't say anything for a couple of seconds, and my sister and I looked at him nervously as he wasn't smiling and staring down at us. "Are you brother and sister?" he finally asked. I told him yes, we were. "Are you camping here?" "Yes," I said. "Where's your camper?" I stupidly, without thinking, told him the section of the campground my parents' club was camping at, which was about 2 blocks away. "Do you guys know who the Johnsons are?" he asked, referring to the name of one of the couples camping in our parents' club. "I don't remember their real name." I told him yes. "Well, they're my aunt and uncle. I'm going to surprise them later that I'm here," he said. He went on to say he was camping with his dad, and he gestured vaguely in a direction on the other side of the pond. The kid squatted down close to my sister. She backed up in the sand closer to me. "You guys look so alike. You can definitely tell you're related," he said, which was kind of ironic since I'm adopted and my sister is my parents' natural child. We did both have brown hair and eyes in common, though. "Did you guys want to come to my camp? My dad brought tons of snacks with. I can give you marshmallows to roast if you want." I told them my parents already have marshmallows. "Well, we have graham crackers and Hershey bars too, so you can make s'mores. I'll give you some of them to take back to your camp." I lied and said that we have them too, as tempting as s'mores sounded. My younger sister finally said she needs to go to the bathroom, which I took as my cue to get away from this weird kid who was really starting to make me feel uncomfortable even at that young age. "We're going to go now. We'll see you later when you come to your aunt and uncle's," I told him. He didn't get up when we got up, but instead leaned closer to us. "There are bathrooms right down that road," pointing again past the pond, "by where your camper is. You can take her there and then stop by and get some candy from my dad." I told him there was a bathroom right over by the main office, which was just across the street from the playground. "We'll just use that one." Suddenly the boy jumped up, kicked whatever my sister and I had been building in the sand, and jumped out of the sandbox. "You are so dumb. Who turns down free candy?" "That's okay, more for me then." My sister and I rushed over to the office building, and I was fearful that he would follow us there. But after a few seconds of staring at us, he turned around and began to run down the path towards the other side of the pond. I took my sister into the men's room. She did her thing, and we cautiously looked around for the boy, who was nowhere to be seen, before we hurried back to our campsite. Once there, I told my parents about what happened, and the Johnsons happened to be sitting on the picnic table having coffee with them, and we told them it was their nephew who was going to surprise them. Of course, they said they didn't have a nephew, but they were a bit weirded out that somebody knew who they were. My sister and I stayed at the campsite the remainder of our time there, and of course the creepy kid never did come to our campsite. Forgive me guys, I am new to Reddit. I came on here to post a story my dad recently told me that he hasn't told anybody about until now. Quick backstory. My dad is a retired park ranger, if that's what you call it. He worked for the National Park Service up until 3 years ago. His usual tasks involve taking people on tours along the Appalachian Trail, maintaining the forestry and the wildlife habitats that live there. So anyway, this story goes back to the summer of 2003 when my dad and a colleague, we shall call him John, were sent out to try and locate an adult elk. A male named Billy by the locals who was usually very tame and was often found close to houses but had not been seen for over a week. This was apparently very unusual for him, so my dad was dropped off along the trail, while John took the truck and drove further down approximately 5 miles in order to try and locate Billy. They had been searching all day for him, and this was the last stop for the day, and there were only a few hours of daylight left. So as the story goes, my dad had been walking along the trail for a little over an hour when he heard a disturbance in the distance off to his left. He could hear the snapping of tree branches, so he decided to follow where the noises were coming from, in the hopes that it could be Billy the elk. As he got closer, he said he began to smell a foul odor and instinctively knew that it was some sort of dead animal. He was right. Lying on the ground in a small opening of trees was the carcass of a large elk. He could see by the tag on one of the ears that it was Billy. However, he was immediately shocked by the condition the animal was in. Billy had been severely mutilated. His eyes and tongue had been gouged out, his throat torn out, and his stomach had been ripped open so that his intestines were protruding on the floor. He also noticed that little chunks of flesh had been bitten in from the torso, and the entire front right leg was missing. He reasoned that the animal had been attacked by either a black bear or coyotes, and nothing else would tackle a fully grown adult elk. However, this seemed strange because elk were usually too big for even apex predators to try to take down, but he thought that maybe a hungry pack of coyotes might if they were starving. What disturbed him further was the way in which the animal had been mutilated after death. My dad made a point of saying he had never witnessed anything quite like it, and that it was very unusual for predators to mutilate a corpse in such a way. Feeling unnerved by this discovery, my dad radioed John and told him he had located the animal before giving him his approximate location. John had told him that he had wandered off the beaten track and that it would take him around an hour to get back to where the truck was parked and drive back to his location. So, my dad was told to wait where he was until John got to him. It was almost dark at this point, and my dad remembered beginning to feel very unsettled. He had a flashlight with him and bear spray, but noted that he still felt very vulnerable alone in the forest. After around 15 minutes or so, he heard the same noises as he heard earlier, much closer now that he was off the trail. He would hear footsteps and the occasional growl of something hidden within the thick bushes straight ahead of him. He said that every so often he could hear slow, heavy breathing and the snapping of branches as whatever it was paced the forest floor. He began to get the feeling that he was being watched and worried that the coyotes, or perhaps even a bear, were now stalking him. He said that every so often he would wave his flashlight in the direction of the disturbance and yell in order to try and scare off whatever it was that was watching him. However, the noises still persisted, and this seemed to aggravate the creature. Luckily, the animal never came any closer or revealed itself to him, simply pacing around in the darkness and letting out the occasional growl. Just over an hour later, the truck pulled up along the trail, and my dad could see, to his relief, that John was now following the flashlight to where my dad now stood. The arrival of another person must have spooked the harasser, as he noticed hearing the crunching of leaves now moving quickly away from them. He told him what had happened, and the man reasoned that it may have been a bear, and that they probably shouldn't hang around. Together they wrapped the corpse in a cloth and managed to haul it into the back of the truck. My dad said that just as they were getting ready to leave, curiosity came over him, and he decided to walk over to where the sounds had been coming from only moments before. John got out as well, and two of them scoured the area. Behind a fallen log, they found the half-chewed leg of the dead elk, along with a number of discarded candy and chocolate bar wrappers and a small length of rope. Further back into the tree line, they found a pair of nitrile gloves covered in blood and human shoe prints leading away from them. They also discovered the remnants of a small fire and a comic book. This had terrified my dad. The realization that it had been a person that had mutilated the elk that had been watching him from the bushes and growling, so much so that he and John had agreed to never mention the encounter to anyone. My dad has told me that not a day goes by that he doesn't think about what he saw that day, and he still struggles to comprehend what the person was doing out there in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere, how they managed to kill the elk, and what their intentions were towards my dad. We relocated from the area in 2005 and now reside near Richmond, Virginia. My dad hasn't been back since and has said that he will never walk the Appalachian Trail again. I can't blame him, to be honest. Anyways, thank you for listening to my story. This took place about a year ago at my job. I work as a part-time cashier at a grocery store, in a mostly empty strip mall, where the hours for the self-checkout station run from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. At the time I was 18 or 19, depending on the month, and I was regularly doing the self-checkout shift. I'm a young woman, average all around, but it's not unusual for strange men to come through the store and make obscene comments. Our self-checkout area backs up to a bank with an ATM, so generally, I would have my back to the bank while I watched the registers. This was about 7 or 8 p.m. at this point. I'm a little bit away from my station, talking with another one of my coworkers, Angela. She no longer works at the store, but she's an older woman, mid-40s, and nice enough. In the middle of our conversation, somebody clears his throat, and I move out of the way so Angela could take his order. His eyes never left me as he said I was a very pretty young girl, to which I thanked him because I just wanted the conversation to end. He continued saying I looked delicious and very soft. He even used the word supple, which I remember because I thought it was really, really weird. At this point, I'm uncomfortable, so I reluctantly leave Angela's lane to go back to my station. However, I stay standing to watch and make sure she's okay. After he's done paying, I think this is the end of it, but he comes over to use the ATM. The whole time he's mumbling about how nice I must be and how pretty girls like you never make it to the car. I got my manager, who asked him to leave as he was making me uncomfortable. As he leaves, he tells me to watch out tonight, that I would never be found. I don't drive due to my eye conditions. I go outside and wait for my mom to pick me up for my shift. Obviously, I asked my coworker to walk me out to the car. We saw him at the end of the sidewalk. He watched us, and my coworker wouldn't leave my side. He wound up driving me home that night while I called my mom to explain what happened. I don't know why I didn't call the police. Something to do with the wishes of the store, but I wish I did. I hope nobody else encountered him. This happened the other day. In my spare time, I sometimes shop for Instacart. It's a cool way to get some extra cash, and I use it as a way to get my 9-month-old son out of the house when we've been cooped up for a while. One evening, I had an order for Target. We headed inside the store like usual and proceeded to start the batch. I'm about 4 items in the procedure section, and at this point 3 people have already made comments to me about how cute my son is. This is a thing anytime we go anywhere. It's all usual and as expected now. Suddenly this older guy, maybe in his early 60s, walks up to my car while I'm looking at avocados and proceeds to hold his hand out to my son as if to signal for a high five with a huge smile on his face. Normally my son is very friendly. He smiles at strangers all the time when they smile at him and tell him how cute he is. But this time he grabbed my jacket and leaned into me, which is what prompted me to notice the man. I immediately asked him to back up and let him know he was closer to me and my child than I was comfortable with. He then apologized and said he didn't mean any harm. I flashed an obviously fake smile and hurried into a nearby grocery aisle. At this point, my mama bear instinct kicks in, and my eyes are constantly peeled at my surroundings with each aisle we go into. I noticed this guy kind of lagging behind, but going into every aisle we go into. With only a tub of disinfecting wipes in his hand, he tries to act like he's browsing, but I can clearly tell I'm being followed. As we proceed to check out, I go into a lane that had a cashier instead of a self-checkout lane, like I normally would for such a small order. My plan was to notify the cashier that I was being followed and ask for assistance to the car. However, I no longer saw the man at this point, so against my better judgment, I refrained from saying anything. Side note, I also carry a taser and some police-grade mace on my keychain. As we head into the parking lot, I pull out my taser and I'm holding it in my hand as I push the car to my car. I take my son out and put him in his car seat, then proceed to place the groceries in the front passenger seat. I lock the car doors behind me as I go to push the cart to the designated cart area. When I turn around to head back to my car, the same man is at my son's window tapping the glass. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I yelled, "What the heck are you doing? I'm gonna kill you, dude." As I ran over to the car, he immediately looked over at me surprised, as if he didn't think I was coming back to my own car, and ran off. It was at that moment I was so thankful that I locked the car doors, as I always do, to just return the cart. Because just that quick, he may have tried to run off with my child. I was so shaken up I got in the back seat with my son and took him out of his car seat and held him while I called the police. I've never been so scared in my life. I started to cry at the thought of how that could have gone if I didn't lock the doors. I waited for an officer to show up and follow me home to make sure the man didn't try to follow us. That was fun to explain to the customer that watched me pull up with the police to deliver their order. That was one of the scariest moments of my life, and I got choked up just thinking about it. But I know one thing. I would have risked my life in that parking lot to protect my child. Hello. I spend around 2 or 3 hours walking alone during the AM hours, every night, and have done so for years, probably 1,000+ hours total. A reason for these walks no longer exists, thus I am stopping it. I have decided to write some of my experiences into a thread, with more later if anyone cares. I will start with my most recent one, which happened a few days ago. I was walking down a path to the entrance to the woods. As I was about to enter, I could see a flashlight walking down a path in the woods coming towards me, appearing to be scouting the area for something. I decided to wait near the entrance until they passed, which is still a few hundred yards from civilization, or any light at all. As they got closer, I could make out a male voice talking to someone over my very loud music. I assumed he was on the phone. Nothing too odd. However, as I expected him to walk past me, he did not. He stood around 4 feet to the side of me. It was really dark, so he was just a silhouette, but I could see he had a massive German Shepherd on a leash. He was still noticeably talking, but it didn't seem like he was trying to get my attention. At this point, I turn away and start walking towards the woods when I can clearly hear him shouting something. That is when I pull one earphone out of my ear and hear something to the effect of, "It's the police. Take your earphones out and stop walking away." Realizing that he was in fact shouting at me the entire time, I turn around and say I'm sorry, I didn't know, and all that. He asks for my name, what I'm doing there, and how long I had been there. I tell him. Then he says, "Well, I'm looking for someone and clearly you're not them. Have you seen a girl around here?" To which I replied no, that I hadn't, and then he walks off back into the woods. That is the end of that story. I walked away and went home. Not the creepiest, I know, but I am left with questions. Was he looking for a girl in the dark alone at that time? And also, if he were looking for an armed criminal, appearing to ignore him and walking away could have ended very badly for me. I'm thankful he didn't lose his cool. That is, if he even was a cop. He did say he was, but I never saw his uniform as it was so dark. I have not seen anything on the news. I just hope that girl is okay, whatever happened. My other story is a lot scarier, yet less conclusive. This one started in a local park around a year ago. For context, this park, although in a nice suburban area, is supposedly notorious for being robbed. However, in my countless hours walking there, this is the only vaguely scary experience I have ever had. I have never felt anything but comfortable otherwise. I was standing by an entrance to the park, maybe 20 feet inside of it. 2 a.m., it was pitch black. I could see a few feet in front of me. The only light is the faint twinkle of streetlights beyond the far side of the park. As I am standing there, earphones in with music as always, I could have sworn I seen some movement in the distance. I squint my eyes and focus on a spot on the far side, trying to make out what I noticed, for maybe 10 seconds. At this point, I realize I'm not looking into the distance, I'm looking directly at someone a mere 10 or so feet in front of me. I shit you not, that feeling of realization is the most single powerful thing I've ever felt in my life. Felt like I was in a horror movie. Heart racing, I turn around and book it to the entrance behind me and start walking down the street towards my home. I'm fairly shaken up, but there's nothing to indicate the guy had any sinister intentions or even knew I was there. Could have been doing the same thing as me. I'm now under the streetlights walking past some well-off houses which felt like safety to me. However, I then turned around and saw a hooded man, a stereotypical roadman as we would call them, emerged from the same entrance as me and turned in my direction. He was around the same distance I would have expected that he started leaving the same time as me, around 10 to 15 feet behind me. Again, nothing sinister, probably I thought. But just to be careful, I picked up the pace a bit. This street is around 200 feet before it merges with the main road. After around halfway, I turned around and saw this guy was directly behind me, 10 feet as he was earlier. I think to myself, wow, that's weird. I'm walking pretty fast and this guy has kept up. So now I start to walk as fast as I possibly can without breaking out into a run. I specifically remember going as fast as a walk would allow me to. I maintain this for another 100 odd feet until I get to the main road. Then I turn around and this guy is literally 5 feet behind me. He is closer than he was before I sped up rapidly. Borderline pants shitting moment. I full on ran all the way home, barefoot sliders by the way, without looking behind me until I got to my front door. That was that. Never saw him again. Could be a coincidence, sure. Maybe I happened upon a 2 a.m. power walker, but also maybe I almost got robbed. I don't know. If I had, it would have been in a different subreddit, lol. Thanks for reading or listening if you did. I have more stories too, but I've been writing these for an hour or two and my eyes hurt. For the amount of time I have spent out in the dark, most of which is in the woods, I have surprisingly few stories. Got a few potentially paranormal ones too, but they aren't allowed here, I don't think. I consider myself lucky, to be honest. I think I was tempting fate for quite some time. This happened only 3 weeks ago. I've thought about it often, and I know without a doubt, me and my patient were almost prey to a predator. I'm a counselor that works for my state. I work with people with substance abuse disorder, the mentally ill, and to a lesser degree, those with slight developmental delays. One aspect of my job with the developmentally delayed is similar to social worker. One thing I have to verify is that the participant is able to achieve their personal goals we set for that year. One of my patients wanted to learn to hike to strengthen herself. When I called to make my visit, she asked if she could show me that she could hike now. I wanted to say, I believe you, lol, but she was excited. I packed my hiking shoes and the next day I made the visit. Her and I are actually similar age, 40s. As we were walking the trail, we got to a point that was much more isolated. We were no longer walking the trail that loops around the neighborhood pond with many people, but we were on a trail that took us through the woods in a cotton field. Her and I were walking and talking when she suddenly stopped walking. I looked at her and just as she went to say, I have a bad feeling, I had an overwhelming feeling myself that somebody was watching us. Due to her development delays, I felt more concerned for her welfare than my own. It's hard to explain, but I didn't feel fear. I felt a feeling of protecting her. I looked behind us because I heard the sound of leaves crunching, and sure enough, a guy who looked to be in his 30s is suddenly coming out of the woods, and he's slowly creeping up towards us. There was nobody else around, so for this guy to magically come out of the woods and creeping up, I knew whatever he wanted was nefarious. I told her to continue walking, giving her a head start. I don't know why I even did this, but I just completely turned myself around. stopped, and I looked straight at him. I just stared. I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, but as soon as we locked eyes, it was as if he realized, now they know I'm back here, because he froze and stopped walking towards us. I kept staring at him, then I started to walk back towards my patient, so he understood my eyes were on him. Then as I walked backwards, I looked over to see my patient, looked back at him, and he disappeared as fast as he came, back into the woods. If he were just wanting to walk this nature trail, why did he stop as soon as I turned around and stared? Why wouldn't he just continue on his walking past us? This guy was clearly waiting and watching for a woman or women to go down the isolated trail. For him to come out of the woods when he did, it was clear to me that he was out hiding and stalking. I will forever be convinced that my patient's bad feeling and my feeling of being watched saved one or both of us from whatever that man had planned. I really loved reading through all of these chilling entries. My prose is certainly duller than most, but I hope you'll read my tale. I realize that these sort of disclaimers are frowned upon, but oh well. For reference, I am a male of 23 years old. So, in the summer of 2009, I was 18, and I went to stay at a hotel on the beach for a few days with my two friends, Brian and Dude. We went to co.ag in Florida. I'm an American. As somebody who's moved around a great deal and seen most of the country, Florida is a bit of a strange place. Some parts are ridiculously beautiful, and some are horrifically dilapidated. Though, I guess that's true of many places. For my money, Florida has consistently the best looking women I've ever encountered, especially if you like Latina women. But the thing about Florida is crazy stuff happens there. Lots of insanely violent and strange crimes. So, Ryan, Dude, and I went to Ron John Surf Shop, which is a huge store where you can buy surfing equipment and apparel. I believe it's a very large chain store. So being young and dumb kids, Dude decides he just wants to steal a Speedo, only for the heck of it. I tell him that if he steals it, I'll wear it on the beach. Dude finds this especially comical. Brian is a very ethical guy, so he wants no part, but Dude steals it anyway. It is getting later in the day, so the beach is getting less crowded. We get back to the hotel and I put on the Speedo. I feel ridiculous in it, but whatever, man. I step out onto the beach as if it's a rakish new swimsuit. 3 of us start kicking a soccer ball around, and random people who see me in the Speedo are laughing and giving me sarcastic thumbs up. Things of that nature. I'm smiling back at them, having a great time. I start to bend over to the ground and stretch in very suggestive ways, thrusting my hips forwardly repeatedly and things like that. People continue to find it humorous. All of a sudden, I hear shouting from the distance. About 100 yards, 90 meters away, there is a pier. Underneath the pier are 5 or 6 very rough-looking gentlemen. These men appear homeless, which doesn't really bother me as I've been homeless myself. All of them have extremely tan and leathery skin, and they're covered in very old and faded looking tattoos. They're all disheveled and toothless and whatnot. They start screaming, "Screw you, Speedo guy," and stuff like that. Again, it still wasn't really a big deal at this point, but now all the other people sort of clear out of the beach in fear of the men. After a while I look up and the group of men is jogging over towards us. Brian, Dude, and I all lock eyes nervously. "Why the heck are you wearing that stuff?" The apparent leader of the group bellows at me. They're just getting close enough for me to see him up close. I'm about 6'2", 190 pounds, and this guy made me look like a little schoolboy with a Power Rangers lunchbox. I have no exactly how tall he was, but he was monstrous and had a blonde mohawk haircut. Now I'm starting to realize that we're going to be the victims of one of Florida's crazy-ass violent crimes. One of the men tosses a really cheap brand beer bottle at the ground in front of me. All the men have glass bottles, and the leader is pretending to hold something behind his back. At this point, the beach is deserted, just like something out of a movie. They have these predatory looks on their faces as they got right up next to us. To me, it felt like they had a sexual appetite for us. All of a sudden, I get an idea. Pretend to be British. I can do a really good English accent based on the accent of Russell Brand. So, I'm like, "Sorry about that there, mate. We didn't realize you Yanks had a dress code. We wear these all the time across the pond, and I swear to you," all of a sudden, the guy gets a big smile on his face and says, "Oh, you guys are from England." All of a sudden, all of the guys are slapping us on the back and laughing. One guy showing Brian a tattoo on his arm, saying he comes from English ancestry. Dude starts talking to them in his best accent too. One guy starts running his hands over my body and squeezing my butt in the Speedo, which was creepy, but better than being stabbed, I guess. I end up making up a story that we come from Yorkshire. I tell him about all the pubs in the tube. Later, I found out that Yorkshire doesn't have a tube, but whatever, I guess. Anyway, the homeless guys all left a little while later, and we came out unscathed. I'm just glad we weren't victims of something way more severe. I was involved in 2 encounters that scared the life out of me. The first one is pretty short. In 2011, I had just graduated from university and fell into a light depression. Naturally, I would wake up later than the rest of the household, and given that my room was the loft conversion, which also was an ensuite, any morning noise did nothing to interfere with my sleep. One such morning around 10 a.m., I lightly awoke to some shuffling. I thought it was probably the birds perched on the roof and went back to sleep. However, 20 minutes or so later, some light noise disrupted my sleep again. When I looked in the direction of the noise, I saw 2 blurry faces in the distance, holding the bathroom door ajar. I realized they saw me too, and I couldn't do anything but freeze. Before I knew it, I heard shuffling followed by 2 bangs, which means they jumped on the extension in the garden. I remained frozen in bed like a popsicle until it all died down. 10 minutes later, I checked the ensuite and saw footprints all over the toilet seat, which is just below the windowsill. Bear in mind, the window is tiny and you really need to be a contortionist to fit in there, so how they got in there is a mystery to me. Since then, that window has remained closed. Story 2. Several years later, in 2017, I saw one of my neighbors walking her dog. I had never spoken to her before, so I expected an awkward salutation until we moved towards directions. But it came to pass that she was taking the same route that I was. We got to talking and she told me how much she loves art house movies. This delighted me because I never get to meet people like that in real life, so we exchanged numbers in order that we could recommend movies to each other. For a whole week we were texting about our favorite movies, scenes, and directors. Then one night she called me. I thought it was unusual since we are not cordial enough for a phone call. I answered, "Hello?" but heard nothing other than static. I repeated it a few times and heard nothing but some static and shuffling. After about 2 minutes, I put the phone down and thought she had pocket dialed me. Then she called me again, but this time she was whispering. I told her I couldn't hear a few times. This happened at least 4 times within 5 minutes. I really didn't think a whole lot of it. On the 5th try, I finally heard her, but it was not something anyone wants to hear. There are people in my house. I am alone underneath the bed. Please call the police for me. I thought she was joking, but quickly realized we aren't that close for her to think that she can play such pranks on me. I told her to remain on the phone with my heart racing. I rushed to the window so I could see her house, diagonal to mine. To my shock, I saw 2 people on the bottom floor. She was breathing heavily over the phone. I asked her where her room was, and she said it was the one facing the street just above the front door. She reached for the tall curtains from underneath the bed and started lightly shaking them. I got her signal. She stayed on the phone. I immediately called the police and explained the situation. They said a few units were on their way post-haste. I knew the cops would take time. For the last few months, I have taken up a casual delivery role of Just Eat, which is a food delivery service like Uber Eats. So, knowing that my knocking on the door to spook the intruders could put me at risk, given they might see my face, I put on my earphones, some stuff in a bag to make it look like a package and a helmet, with the face covering, and hopped on the motorcycle, covered the number plates with black tape, located in the garage behind my house, to make it look like I was delivering something. I went all around the street and accelerated towards her property. In the meantime, I told my neighbor not to speak and that I will walk her through everything I am doing. "I'm going to ring the buzzer," I said to her. My heart was beating so fast, I felt faint when my hand touched the buzzer. I cannot describe how difficult it was for me to press it. It was as if I was lifting double my body weight. Now, I am thinking any real criminal would run away. Not these guys. I didn't hear anything, but I saw the torches being turned off. So I rang again. Nothing. No noise, no shuffling. Nothing that would make one think someone was trying to escape. All I heard was her breathing. I saw a half-broken brick on top of the bed. People placed them to protect the bins from flying open when it's windy, so I pushed the brick next to my feet just in case I'd have to use it. Then suddenly I became brave. I pressed the buzzer again, but this time I yelled, "Delivery!" I heard some footsteps, so I repeated it. A husky voice from the other side of the door said, "Nope, that's the next door." My heart almost stopped. My brain began to scatter and I stammered, Sorry, sir." Then I heard the most beautiful noise in the world. Sirens. You see, I am not the greatest fan of cops, but that sound made me feel safe for the first time ever. It was like hearing Frank Ocean's Nights for the first time. That is when the fear which the criminals in my house had the courtesy of possessing became vocal. Hurrying movements and shuffling radiated from in the house. I heard a door from a distance swing open, followed by rushing footsteps, implicative of running. As the footsteps joined into the unified sound of a whole city, sirens flushed out all of the noise. I told her to remain silent and remain alert. The cops were in front of the house and I took my helmet off. The cop asked me if I was the one who called and I said yes. Is she still in there? Yes. They surrounded the house and knocked on the door. Nobody answered. The cops told me to ask her to remain in the house. Another cop then radioed in, saying the back door was open and the garden window smashed. They said they were going. After searching the house, they found her underneath the bed safe. A few cops went on to search for the suspects, but because my area is full of lakes, ponds, rivers, thickets, and marshes intertwined with residential properties, it was difficult to find them. I went back to put my bike into the garage. When I came back, she looked visibly shaken but was also happy. She thanked me and I was happy she was fine. They could not take anything as a bag and some valuables were found scattered in the garden. They probably felt the inventory was too heavy for them to make a swift escape. This whole ordeal lasted longer than the time it took me to write this, but I'm happy I finally put it on the proverbial paper. Why now? I was reminded when 2 police officers knocked on my door to inform me that the suspects had finally been caught, and they had used the footprints from my bathroom and DNA from hers to identify them. The robbers were caught in the act and charged with the 2 previous attempted break-ins, for the one at mine and hers. I guess the thieves were still laymen when they had attempted to break into my room and were easily irked, not so much the second time around. Whatever they may feel now, let's not meet a third time. When I was around 25 years old, I was working at a tiny restaurant that served desserts. It was a pretty hidden and quiet location, so I was there alone in the mornings. On one occasion, a man walked in and I recognized him from the night before. He had been there with his wife and grown children. The only other time I'd ever seen him. This time he was alone and began talking to me. Everything seemed like the typical small talk, but he kept commenting that I looked 19 and saying that he could help me. That he could get me into his job that paid $7 more than what I was making at the time. I was intrigued at first, so I asked for the name of the company, getting kind of excited, but he would just keep talking and not give it to me. He then began talking about how he has affairs and that his wife knows and is okay with it, mentioning that he had an affair with somebody once who was 19, and that now she was happily married and that to that day she thanks him for all he taught her. At this point I'm getting creeped out, but he wouldn't stop talking. This one car drove by in the solitary area, and they'd wave at him through the glass doors, and he kept telling me how he knew so many people. It all felt very shady. He wouldn't stop pestering me about this job, telling me I should apply but not giving me a name. He would tell me the overall area of where it was at, which was by the outskirts of the city, but avoid the name. Kept telling me to follow him after work so that he could come get me in. Probably hired on the spot. I told him my car was getting fixed so my sister would be picking me up anyway, so I couldn't. But since he wouldn't take no for an answer, I eventually decided to tell him I would just so he could leave. But as soon as I did, he changed the goal, and now he was telling me to just get into his car with him. That way they would see me arrive with him and would hire me right away. In between all of this, he randomly shows me a white paper that was supposedly his license to carry. Very random. He also gives me a name of the company. Eventually I told him I would and come back at the time I'd be off, just so that he would leave. I went to the back and looked up the name of the supposed job and there was nothing. I used Google Maps to search the area he mentioned and nope, not a factory, not anything. Once my time to leave arrived, my sister picked me up from the side of the building and as we drove away, he had indeed came back and was parked near the location around the corner. Never saw him again. I was recently retelling this story to a friend of mine and deeply regretting not reporting this. I had an issue with dissociation due to past life experiences. And although I was 25, I was much more naive than most 25-year-olds. You never know what people are about, especially with him showing me his license to carry. And I hope that me not reporting it didn't get anyone else hurt. I work late at a lab at the University of South Florida, as I like to do my work with nobody else around. My apartment is just a short way off campus, around a 10-minute drive and a 40-minute or so walk depending on what I took. While I do live in Tampa, it's far away from the cities. No 3-story buildings in sight. A few neighborhoods, ample amounts of trees and ponds, and a stone's throw from a rather sizable state park of 240 acres, which, in turn, is adjacent to a substantially larger wilderness area. What that means is a lot of wildlife. I regularly see deer grazing on a golf course nearby, growing alligators, roaming the ponds and small lakes. Turtles abound, plenty of vultures, storks and smaller birds, and much more. On my nightly walks or drives, I've often heard or even seen foxes, bobcats, coyotes, and even a black bear once. So you can imagine when I found out several cats and small dogs had gone missing, I naturally thought that if a predator was responsible, it would be one of the larger coyotes or bobcats, or maybe even a bear or gator. People, especially in gated communities, leave their pets out to roam about in the day or at night. Still, that did leave the question of how a predator could or would get over several fences and gates, some of which would be quite the hassle to climb, and there was no sign of being tunneled under. Why go for a pet inside a box that would be hard to get out of when fat ducks were extremely abundant? Well, I got my answer in a way I never expected. I was driving back from the lab late around 11 p.m. when I stopped as I could see an animal on the road. The figure was very tall but also thin, so I initially thought the pale color I saw to be viewing a deer from behind. However, I soon noticed the animal was actually pale all over its main body and had extremely thin dark legs. When it raised itself up somewhat, I realized I was looking at a great white heron from behind. Great white herons are a regional color morph of great blue herons, being nearly all white in coloration, including the trademark tassels coming off the brows of the birds, save for the top jaw and feet, which are both dark blue or black. The white form usually only appears in very southern Florida, but occasionally one will show up further north. They also tend to be on the larger end of the species size. I make no jest when I note how big this avian was. Standing up straight, some of the bigger great herons can look a grown man in the eye. Behind a nearly foot-long crazy-shaped beak, the heron was throwing its head up and down and was clearly doing something, but I couldn't be sure of what. It was standing in the road about 20 yards ahead of my car, and only reacted when I got closer. It swung its head around, and I'll never forget the sight right as I stopped 10 yards away. The heron was standing still, unflinching, as its eyes brightly reflected in the headlights. The white feathers across the chest and part of the wing were stained a tarry red from coagulating blood, as it had half of a cat hanging out of its mouth. Herons can gulp down surprisingly large prey, such as big fish, muskrats, bullfrogs, and even young alligators. But it's one thing to see them swallow a wild creature whole and still, frame or in pixels on a video. It's a whole different ordeal to see one doing it in the flesh after killing its very prey by impaling it on the beak. When I compared their beak earlier, I meant it. They can impale that thing through the armored scales of garfish. Herons have been known to kill eagles by ramming their beaks through the latter's chest. This poor cat never stood a chance. The heron didn't at all seem fazed by my arrival. Instead, it flicked the dead cat back and forth, some to position at its mouth, before tilting its head up. You know that shot from Jurassic Park with the Tyrannosaurus swallowing a goat? Same sort of visual at first, only with another disgusting detail. When the heron started swallowing, its thin neck bulged outwards to accommodate the food. It kept its eyes pointed straight at me as the big wad of slain feline slowly worked down its throat to the crop, sometimes a limb visibly impressing outwards from the stretched skin. All the while the heron let out raspy breaths, while standing tall, still spattered in gore from pecking the poor pet to death. And after it finally swallowed its prey, the heron paced closer in to the side of the road. It actually got next to the car at one point and was close enough I could confirm its height at about 5 feet or more because the top of its back was level with my side mirror. It was at that point I realized I had the windows partially rolled down and was smelling the sanguine musk of death. The damn bird was level with my window, looking right at me and leaning closer. Needless to say, that snapped me out of my stupor. I blared the horn to make it back off. On the menu or not, I didn't at all like how it was looking at me. Driving down the road and making the turn, I could still see it looking towards the car as it paced down the darkened sidewalks, like it was the most casual thing ever for a 4 to 5 foot tall predator, half covered in blood, to be there. Obviously, I was in no direct danger myself, being in the car and decidedly not on the menu, but I didn't at all like the way it looked at me. This avian predator clearly didn't at all fear people. even if it seemed conscious of cars in my presence. And given this happened at a gated community, I'd never seen any mammalian predators bigger than a possum, and I think it's fair to say I now know what was eating the pets. We can often hear nowadays that birds are living dinosaurs, but I don't think some quite register that as the featherheads they're familiar with are fat city pigeons or delicious fowl. I think seeing this would help get the message across. And at night, ever so often, I can hear the deep, throaty shrieks that species give off flying over from the forests and swamps and into the neighborhoods. Don't leave your pets out, people. I moved out of state to a very small town. On the first day of moving in, a neighbor walking his dog greets me and introduces himself to me. Gives me a quick rundown that the neighborhood is filled with tweakers and other shady types. I took that as a general warning that may be all I'll deal with. A few months later, he invited me over to his place to teach me how to do some woodwork. As we were making a shelf for my cat to sit on, he's asking me questions. To me, they were normal everyday questions, but looking back, I realized how he was trying to get information out of me. Why did you move out here from out of state? Who lives with you? Or do you have any other family members in the state or area? Once we were done, we went to install the shelf, and he met my mom, who stays with me. He talks to her for a bit, then we leave to walk back to his place. He starts telling me that he can see our yard from his place and notices that I barely go outside with my dogs. Told me not to worry that if someone breaks into our place, he can see them and shoot them from his room. That's what I'm thinking. How is that possible because you live over half a block away? Before I can question him, he asks me if I want to see more of the town. I'm like, yeah, let's go. He walks to his car and pulls something out from the middle compartment, and then tells me to go in his pickup truck. So I do, while he's filling the gas tank up with gasoline. Once he's done, he walks to the driver's side, opens the door, and drops a holster between us. He tells me not to worry about it as I look, trying to see if it was a gun or not. As we're driving, I realize he hasn't said a word for about 5 minutes, and this guy loves to hear his own voice. Another thing I noticed is that we're on a dirt road and haven't seen a single house, trailer, or vehicle for a while. I guess I gave off some nervous vibes because he suddenly goes, so yeah, you know where you're going out here. If you don't, you get lost. And it's best to have a pickup or ATV to drive out here. After about another 10 minutes of silent driving, we get to a little creek. Luckily, there was another truck there. All he says is, oh, look at that, someone else is here with us. And he grabs the holster and gets out. We see a lady with a big dog playing in the water. She turns to us and she sees him walking closer to her. She gestures to his holster and he tells her not to worry, that it's for the snakes. She lifts her shirt above her waist to show her gun and she tells him she's not worried one bit. They talk for a few minutes and she tells him that her husband is home waiting for her to make dinner and she's just out letting the dog have some playtime. The neighbor changes his tone and posture from confident to defensive now. She called her dog and they went back to their truck. He's watching her and she hasn't started her truck yet. A few minutes pass and he tells me, I guess it's time we go too. When we get to his truck, she drives off. On the drive back, I start to get uneasy and creeped out. Why would he drive me all the way out there and just leave? Why tell me not to worry about the holstered gun, but tell the lady what it's for? I finally get out of my head and just break the silence and give him my life story as to why I moved. Finally, he responds that he can relate to my story and gives me the rundown of how the town is and what it's about, and that some people are more racist than others and I should watch my back for that. Once we get back to his place, I tell him I have stuff to take care of at home and get the heck out of there. I said to myself, if I'm ever going to hang out with him again, it won't be alone. This happened a few years ago. I was going through a difficult time, so I was looking for a new place to live without big commitments until I figured life out. I met this guy through a Craigslist posting. He said he had an apartment and was looking for a roommate. I got his name and number, called him, set up a meeting at a public place for a meet and greet. Everything went seemingly fine and he agreed to show me the place. He seemed super nice and helpful. He was easy to get along with, was neat and low maintenance. It didn't bother me that he was a guy. We agreed on no drugs, no parties, and no craziness terms. We agreed on monthly payments and I moved in a few weeks later. So it was after 2 weeks. One day he comes in early from work and has this very upset voice and claims that we need to talk. He says that I've been acting inappropriately by having my boyfriend stop by on occasion, not even to stay or spend the night or anything like that, to see me for like 10 minutes every now and then. I began questioning him, and he just said that he made him feel uncomfortable because everyone at the apartment complex thought I was his romantic partner. I was so furious and couldn't believe this. It then escalated to a point that he said the entire time he had known me, which is for like 2 weeks of very minimal interaction, plus the fact that I work night shifts, so he was by himself most of the time when he was home. He was convinced that, "I believe you are possessed. I can see it in your eyes." I knew at this point that shit had totally hit the fan and that I needed to get as far away from this weirdo as I could. He acted all calm, saying that I could take my time looking for a new place and that our arrangement would not work. So I told my boyfriend what happened, found an apartment I could move into, and had a plan to do it the very next day. I told the insane roommate. The next day my moving out comes, and I walk into the apartment to get my stuff. There is this wooden cross above my room's door frame with Jesus on it, which was pretty offensive to me since I am a Christian and this lunatic had decided that I'm possessed. I walk into my room and there are these creepy candles all lit. I packed up all my belongings and left. He sent a message to me later with, of course, something that had to do with God and how he was hoping I would face my sins in darkness. I blocked this creep's number after that. I do trust people a lot less and would never have a roommate now. And this was the very first time ever in my life that I had one. Yeah, for 2 weeks. So I live in a compound, and we have a gym in the community. I used to go at 2 a.m. 6 times a week. One day this guy walks in and starts working out, and at the end of my session, he says if I needed any gym advice, I should ask him. What was weird is he's really skinny, while you can tell I've been gymming for a really long time. I didn't really think much of it until a few days later. He appeared again at the same time. For a whole year, I've never seen him come at this time. And he started talking to me during my workout, and we exchanged Instagram accounts. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he recently moved into this compound and wants to meet people. Same day he messaged me saying, "I see some good chest progress," to which I replied, "Thank you, I appreciate it," and also didn't think much of it. For the next 3 weeks, he would try to initiate outings and gymming together, which I wasn't interested in, so I avoided him and changed my gym time because I changed my sleep schedule. Coincidental. So once I went to the gym at 9 p.m., he was already there, and I was kind of forced to have a conversation with him afterwards for like 10 minutes, and he said, "Let's go for coffee," which I declined, saying my friends are waiting for me online, and I could see a disappointed look on his face. A few days later, he was driving into the compound and saw me walking back home, so he honks the car and initiates another conversation right outside my house. He talked about his uni work and how busy he is as I cut the conversation, saying it was too humid, so I'm going inside. The next day, he walked into the gym a few seconds after I did, and we were chatting about random stuff. One of them being how I was buying these LED lights on Amazon, and slowly, he started talking about praying in religion and what I think about it and whether I pray or not. I said I do have a relationship with God and I pray in my own way, and he kept repeating some of my sentences, sighing right after. It was very weird, so I put my earphones on and said I'll listen to music, and I could tell he was doing random workouts as if to wait for me to be done. He catches up to me as I'm leaving and starts talking about the car parked outside my house and how I should see his car one day, which I agreed to. Literally right the next day, he called me 3 times, which I didn't pick up until the next day, when he called me and I picked up in case I saw him in the gym. I was preparing to go. I told him I was busy the day before and he said it's okay. I just wanted to tell you I left you some LED lights on your car. I couldn't relax until I made sure I gave them to you, to which I replied, "You don't have to, I don't want them," as he kept insisting and saying it was nothing. Everything that has happened before this moment seemed weird but not creepy. During the phone call, I felt so uneasy that I almost just hung up and blocked his phone number, as he was becoming really obsessive. He said, "What are you up to?" To which I replied, "Not much, might go to the gym later, but I was planning to go now. I just didn't want him to follow." And he replied, "Oh cool, I'm doing some studying and researching some stuff." So I said, "Alright man, enjoy," and hung up. I went around my whole house making sure all the doors and windows were completely shut and locked and headed to the gym, and bam, he was there. We said hi to each other and I put my earphones on and completely avoided him until I finished. He followed and said, "Hey, you want to see my car now?" Which I said sure. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. The whole building is covered with 24/7 surveillance, so I went and saw his car on the basement floor. And as we got to it, he looked back at a guy that had just arrived there with his bothered look. So he looked back at me and said, "Well, this is my car." I said, "Oh, cool." As I started stepping away, he started talking about his bike and how he wrecked it. It was next to the car. as if to get me back closer to the car. So I said, "Alright, well, I'll see you." Just as he said, "Wait, let me walk you home," which I refused as he gave me another weird look. I forgot to mention that this guy's presence on Instagram is super weird. He just posts about cars and selfies from up to 1 year ago. Nothing about him before then, no name, no age. He told me he's 18. I'm 22. I have no idea how to act. Do I block this person and tell him I don't want to communicate with him? Do I stay in contact with him to make sure they don't pull some weird stuff since they know where I live? Do I call the authorities? I'm sitting at home feeling like I'm being watched. Any advice?